I have a couple of E2s that are finally finished, or finished enough anyway. As was the case with CTMC, they're also getting a release video. These are CFCS and CGC. This video is all about the gun chip, CGC. The chip can aim two different guns with their own unique traverse limits, speeds, and depression elevation limits. The main gun has 3 depression zones. Everyone and their dog seems to be using Parentech guns now, and the chip has a special setting for aiming these guns with holograms. It can still aim a gun with apply aim force too. So now on to setting up the E2. We'll need a pilot controller, a cam controller, and an EGP. And because I'm going to show you how to make 2 apply force guns first, we're also going to need some weld latches to lock the guns. Okay, so from the chip, go ahead and wire active to the power controller's active output. And hit pose actually goes to the cam controller. Now another thing about the cam controller, this E2 won't control the camera for you. Instead I'm using the head chip for that. And I have the activated wire to activated on the power controller, but that's a heads up display thing, so not going to worry about that too much. Also, filter entities. So the gun chip has a filter entities output as well, but I prefer to use the one on the heads up display, so that's fine. Go ahead and wire pod it to the entity. Go ahead and wire the main gun up. And MG base. Now, MG base is going to determine what the gun rotates relative to. So, like all the depression limits and the horizontal traverse and all of that. And in this case, that's going to be my base plate. Secondary gun. And the secondary gun has its base. Now, the secondary gun angles are going to be relative to the turret ring here, in my case. And also, I'm going to go ahead and wire up my latches, so activated on this weld latch to MG latch for my main gun, and activated on this latch to SG latch for my secondary. So pretty much the only other thing to do in order to get the E2 up and running from here is to go ahead and align the hollows. So I'm going to set show hollows to 1 for now. And update the chip. Now to align the hollows, you can see that my base plate is already aligned, but basically the red Y needs to point to the left, the green X needs to point forward, the blue Z needs to point up, and that's going to be it. And my secondary is already aligned, but my turret ring isn't, because it has some weird angles to it. And also my main gun would normally be aligned, but I actually rolled it to the side because, I don't know. So let's go ahead and align. Let's actually align the main gun first. Let's actually go ahead and roll it 90 degrees. Okay, that was the wrong way. How about -90? All good. Now for the turret ring, which is going to be my SG base. Maybe a bit of trial and error to this. There we go. And the alignment's all done. We can actually go ahead and turn off the hollows for now. Okay, so to test this, there's not really a whole lot to it. And just hit F, and that'll unlock both of the guns. There we go. So we're aiming on target rather than above it because the weight was a bit centered backwards. Now you can see, by default the secondary has a faster traverse than the main gun. 5 degrees of gun depression. Oh, and they're also 360 turrets. yeah, there's really not a whole lot to it. So how about those hollow aim guns? Now a quick note about the hollow aim guns, they don't need weld latches. So you can actually see I have a couple of gates, 4 to be exact, 2 per each gun. And now the first gate, the ones you see standing upright, it doesn't matter the orientation of the gates at all, but these are going to be the traverse gates. So this is the axis of the gun rotates around in a circle like that. And the second gate is the elevation gate, and I just put that close to the gun. And you can see here I have my traverse gate and elevation gate for the gun. Now where these gates are doesn't really matter, because the point they rotate around will set that up in the E2. Another thing about these gates is that they don't have constraints, and the guns need to have their constraints taken off as well. So I'm going to go ahead with the remover tool. Go ahead and hit R. Alright, so let's wire these gates. So MG gate is going to go to your elevation gate, the main gun. And the ring gate is going to go to the traverse gate for the main gun. Likewise for the secondary gun gates, elevation, and also traverse. And that should be all for now. Actually, no. We need to go ahead and parent these. So what I'm actually going to do is constraints from the turret ring. And I'm just going to parent this to my gate. But primarily, I can go ahead and parent the guns to the gate. The elevation gates at that. Okay, let's try this again. Alright, now we're done for the external part. Now, this is what'll make the main gun a hollow parented, or hollow aim gun. But don't turn this on just yet. I want to go ahead and set up the center of traverse. And for that, it's going to be at the very end here. MG ring post. And I'm actually just going to use the turret ring with a bit of position alignment. And this point is going to be relative to the MG base, so I'm actually going to highlight that. Go ahead, get those coordinates relative to the base plate. Put that right there. Good. Let's go ahead and do the same for the secondary gun. So I'll just center it on the gate, and the secondary's base is the turret ring, so that's what the coordinates are going to have to be relative to. Clean up the numbers a bit. Go ahead and put it in SG ring pose. Now you can actually change the center of elevation on the guns. By default, they're just going to be the mass center of the guns, I believe. So I'm actually not going to touch that, but to change that, that would be the offset vectors. But now we're ready to go ahead and make these parented guns. So let's do that. And you can see some other hollows came up. Now they're the same as the alignment hollows, but they are green for the secondary gun and red for the main gun. Now it can be pretty derpy working with hollow parented things because they have a nasty tendency of deleting themselves. Everything parented to the gates and even the gates themselves. But the first thing I want to do is actually get rid of these hollows. All good? All good. And to actually test this, you don't want to update the E2 and test it on that version. You actually want to get a dupe of it. Get a new spawn. Because that's one of the reasons the gates and the guns like to delete themselves. Let's go ahead and test it here. So, working as intended. Now, you can see that the motion is a bit jerkier, because they're running on the same interval the apply force was. But, you now have yourself one of those fancy hollow-aimed guns. There are a couple of fancy hollow-aimed guns. And you can see they keep their traverse rates and traverse limits and depression and all of that, really. Anything you can change for the main gun, you can also change for the secondary gun, with the exception of the depression zones. So I'm only going to cover half of the settings. You can change the keybind for unlocking the gun with latchkey, and this site has a list of all the possible keybinds. Rot speed changes the rotation speed of the gun in degrees per second, in theory anyway. The first number is the elevation depression speed, the second is the horizontal traverse speed, and the third is there for decoration and should be left 0. Lay speed is only used for apply force guns. Normally, as the gun gets closer and closer to being on target, it slows down so it doesn't overshoot. You could say that the gun has its speed dampened. When you change this, you're changing the damping ratio. Higher numbers aim the gun more aggressively. Too aggressively if set high enough. This shouldn't impact the max speed of the gun as defined by rot speed. Rot lim sets the left and right limits of the gun. 180 would be a 360 turret. It can rotate all the way around. And anything less and the gun will behave like a casement. Elevation is how far the gun can aim up. Depression is how far the gun can aim down. Now this would be one number for the secondary, but you set 3 here for the main gun. Front, side, and rear. Let's start with front arc. This is the zone of the tank where the depression will be the first number in MG depression. Quick note, the arcs go to a max of 180 degrees, not 360. They just get mirrored across. There's 2 spots in side arc, and that's because these are the beginning and end of the side of the tank. If the beginning doesn't line up with the front arc, depending on how much between the 2 zones the gun is, it will transition between the first and second number, front and side, of MG depression. Finally is rear arc. No points for guessing that this is the beginning of the rear zone. Again, if the gun is caught between the end of the side arc and the rear arc, it will transition between the side and rear depression values. So how about this correction stuff? This is only relevant for the apply force guns, by the way. The chip rotates the gun, but the gun usually has other stuff attached to it. The chip knows how strong the force should be to rotate just the gun, but not all the other stuff added to the gun. If you add enough stuff to the gun or just have a very small gun, the aiming can feel floppy. That's where these 2 come in. For the most part, all you need to worry about is this first one, rot correction. It's for when there is an excess of stuff attached to the turret ring. You can tell this is the case when your elevation is nice and rigid, but the traverse is loose. Turn it up until the traverse is nice and firm, but not too high because that'll make your GMod tank do GMod things. The second one is where things can get kind of confusing. Con correction is for when there's an excess of stuff attached directly to the gun, usually via ball socket. Elevation and traverse will seem floppy. This one's a vector, so you can change all 3, but realistically, they're all going to be the same number because of the inertia properties of what's basically a pole. Both of these can get messy if you, say, had 2 main guns, you'd only wire 1, but also a bunch of stuff on the turret base. Though it could be done, it's just a bit tedious. One last thing about the rotation speed setting. This is combined with the speed of the gun's base. For example, if your tank hull, which happens to be your main gun's base, is rotating counterclockwise at say 25 degrees per second, and your gun has a max speed of say 15 degrees per second on the traverse, the hull will overpower the gun's traverse to the point where even though you're trying to aim the gun clockwise, it actually ends up rotating counterclockwise at 10 degrees per second. 25 minus 15 is 10. This will work with apply force and hollow aim guns. This will not work if the gun's base isn't physical. If you wire the base to a parent hit prop with no constraints, the chip can't get an angular speed from the prop. The elevation, depression, and traverse limits will still work, but the gun will behave like stabilized guns do in War Thunder, ignoring the speed of the hull. This is an unintended side effect of how the chip combines the gun and gun base speeds. As for performance, again tested on real builders, the chip seems to hang around 90 CPU usage for 2 apply force guns and around 60 for 2 hollow aim guns. Have fun!